leaders and teams are not creating space to be thoughtful about one another. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. You and I often talk about kind of that concept, which is not our concept, but one that very much applies in leadership, is going from working in the business to on the business, right? Creating space to do that. So you're not just constantly running. You're pausing for a minute, thinking about others, thinking about needs of others, and trying to find ways to meet that. Yeah.
And something I've heard you say many times, and I totally agree with you, and this is part of some of the work that I know you do in the Foundry and Delivery, is you often talk about how much time leaders should be spending on relationships to create alignment. That's another thing that I think has been sacrificed. I think teams are, they've kind of lost that connectivity and that alignment around a common goal and common vision because they're not investing in the conversations, in the relationships. It's almost like every time we see a screen filled with smiling faces, they're 15 smiling faces, very disjointed and very siloed, and it's kind of the environment that we're in. But you and I both know that if those faces are not talking to each other and continuing to invest personally and professionally, they're going to suffer as a team.
Yeah. I think we're taking on some important topics here that some of this could definitely apply to any team. I want to pivot it just slightly and go down a more focused angle. When you think about the difference between teams, even more senior-ish teams, versus an XLT or an SLT, we think about the most senior team. What are some of those unique challenges that happen in the most senior teams that we need to be aware of and watch out for?
Well, I think every leadership team needs to be cognizant that they are going to be the role models for someone. So I don't care if you're the CIO with your directs, you're modeling for the rest of your organization how to behave. You're setting the tone. But if you're the XLT, if you're at the top of the food chain, the entire company is likely going to watch you and maybe model your behavior. So if you're on an executive team and you're dysfunctional, if your relationships aren't working, if you're not aligned, if you're not practicing candor, if you're not managing your time well, I could just go on and on and on. If you're not doing those things well, what is the ripple effect throughout the organization? Well, that's how they operate. That must be the way we do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real issue. So everything that happens there cascades down.
Yeah, I would agree. As I think about that question, one thing I also think makes it really challenging for like an XLT or an SLT is, if you're in an department team, let's say it's a marketing department, you've got a lot of brand managers on that team. You're all basically doing the same thing. So you don't have to talk to each other, but you have a lot of common interests.
Right.
Your common work you're doing, and you can collaborate and sometimes you are put together on projects. But if you're on an XLT, the CFO is not doing the same thing as the CHRO,
right,
or the COO or the CMO. And I may not even know that world very well, or I may not even care about that world very well. And on top of that, I got plenty in my world that I can dedicate all my time on. So when we think about things like alignment, it makes it that much more challenging because it's not as organic or as natural, because why would I talk to the people in marketing?
Well, see, but that senior executive team, you're right. It's not a bunch of brand managers talking about getting the widget, more market share. You're talking about this executive team is the keeper of the culture. They're the keeper of the values, the keeper of the mission. So if they don't have alignment around those things, just think again about the dysfunction that results.
Yeah, and the analogy that you've heard me say before that makes sense to me, hopefully makes sense to people listening, is companies like a car. And some functions are brake pedal functions, and some functions are gas pedal functions. Marketing and sales are gas pedal functions. And they're like, sell, and spend, right? And those are fun. But if we're only got our foot on the gas pedal, it's a fun ride for about 6 months, and then off the cliff we go.
Yes.
And then there's some functions like the finance organization, sometimes HR, definitely legal, are brake pedal functions, where it's like, hold on, wait a minute, we got to keep ourselves safe. But if you only put your foot on the brake pedal, you don't leave the parking space. So you need both to make that car kind of hug those turns as you're going around the mountain. So alignment, to your point, is really critical. It's not a nice to have. It's a mandatory thing. You've got to have the brake and the gas. But I think it becomes less and less natural the higher up we go. So you're definitely making the important point that it's mandatory, folks. You're setting the culture.
Yes.
It allows the business to function well. But it's easier to fall in your own little world and just talk to the folks that and know you.
There's one other issue that you and I haven't talked about, and I'm actually glad that we waited to this point because I think we needed to get those other things out there.
I'm nervous. I'm nervous.
Don't be nervous.
We haven't talked about this yet.
It's all good. It's all good. So if we are working on that foundation of really solid relationships, and we know that if we do that, we're going to have more candor and more alignment and all the things that matter. The thing that's also going to happen is we're likely to have more trust. And sometimes, especially in the climate we're in today, I think you and I are seeing more and more teams are having trust issues. It bubbles up every time we do gap interviews, every time that we do our investigative work to get ready for a large project. We always find that word bubbles to the surface. So I think those other things we mentioned, all important, but it's also the lack of relationships and the lack of candor. All those things are creating environments where distrust is prominent.